A black teen stuns court, exposing a cop's lies as a lawyer's son. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to catch our latest epic stories. Ethan Brooks's voice rang out in the Cook County Circuit Court, a clear, defiant thunderclap that silenced the restless hum of the packed gallery. His lean 18-year-old frame standing tall at the defendant's table. His borrowed suit creased, but his dark eyes blazing with a fire that made the oak-paneled room feel smaller. As he declared, "Your Honor, I'm not just innocent. I'm going to prove this case is a lie, and you'll see who the real criminals are." The words were a grenade, detonating in the faces of Judge Richard Klein, whose gray brows shot up, his gavel frozen midair, and Martin Hayes, the slick prosecutor whose tailored suit couldn't hide the twitch of unease in his jaw, while Officer James Whitaker, the white cop who'd accused Ethan of stealing his car, shifted in the witness stand, his smug grin faltering under the weight of Ethan's gaze. The courtroom was a crucible, its air thick with prejudice. The gallery's whispers, thug. And he's done for, a venomous chorus that had followed Ethan since his arrest 3 days ago, when Whitaker's squad had stormed his Northwestern University dorm, cuffs snapping on his wrist as they dragged him out, claiming a grainy video and an eyewitness pinned him to the theft. Ethan, a freshman with a scholarship and a dream of law, stood alone, his decision to represent himself drawing gasps and sneers, Klein's voice dripping with contempt as he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're barely old enough to vote. Brooks, you think you can play lawyer in my court? This is grand theft, not a debate club." The word play cut deep, laced with the same racism Ethan had faced his whole life, on Chicago's South Side, in lecture halls, in the eyes of cops like Whitaker, who saw his black skin and assumed guilt. Hayes seized the moment, striding before the bench, his voice oily with confidence. "Your Honor, the evidence is ironclad, fingerprints, a witness, a video showing the defendant in the act. Ethan Brooks is a danger, a thief who disrespects the law." The gallery nodded, their prejudice a palpable force, but Ethan's hands were steady, his heart pounding with the fire of a truth he'd yet to unleash. He wasn't just a student, he was Ethan Brooks, son of Malcolm Brooks, a legendary civil rights lawyer who'd taught him law since he could read. His mind, a razor honed by years of mock trials and case studies. The theft charge was a setup, Whitaker's revenge for Ethan questioning a traffic stop months ago, and he'd spent every moment since his arrest building a defense to shatter it. "Permission to respond, Your Honor," Ethan said, his tone measured but sharp, his eyes locking onto Klein's, daring him to deny. The judge, caught off guard by the boy's poise, nodded grudgingly, his sneer intact. Ethan stepped forward, his voice rising, each word a calculated strike. "The prosecution's evidence is a house of cards. The video, it's tampered, missing metadata, and I have proof it was edited. The witness? A known liar with a rap sheet for perjury. My fingerprints? Left on Whitaker's car during a stop he initiated. Not a theft. This isn't a case. It's a conspiracy." The courtroom erupted, spectators gasping, reporters scribbling furiously, Hayes' face paling as he scrambled to interrupt. His voice shrill. "Objection! This is baseless speculation." But Klein, his brow furrowed, raised a hand, his skepticism wavering under Ethan's command of the room. Whitaker's grin was gone, his hands clenching the stand, his eyes darting to Hayes for rescue. Ethan pressed on, his voice a low growl, his gaze sweeping the gallery, where a black woman in the back, maybe a community activist, nodded, her fist raised in silent support. "I'm not the one on trial here," Ethan said, his words a blade. "You want to talk disrespect? Ask why an officer would frame a kid for asking questions. Ask why this court assumes my guilt before I speak." The gallery's jeers faltered, a murmur of doubt rippling through, but Klein banged his gavel, his voice sharp. "That's enough! Brooks, you're pushing it. One more outburst, and you're in contempt." Ethan's smile was cold, His mind racing. He had evidence. A gas station camera showing him elsewhere. A GPS log confirming his alibi. But he held it back, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Hayes, recovering, smirked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, this is a desperate act from a guilty defendant. Let's move to sentencing." But Ethan's gaze locked onto Whitaker, whose sweat betrayed his fear, and he knew he'd rattled them. The courtroom was a battlefield, the gallery divided, and Ethan Brooks was no victim. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a warrior ready to turn their lies against them. His father's lessons a shield as he prepared to dismantle the case and expose the truth that would shake this court to its core. The South Side streets of Chicago were a gauntlet of wary glances and hushed whispers as Ethan Brooks stepped out of the Cook County Circuit Court. His borrowed suit creased from the tense hours spent facing Judge Richard Klein's contempt, Martin Hayes' smug accusations, and Officer James Whitaker's fabricated evidence. A storm of prejudice that had branded him a thief before he could speak. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, but the weight of the courtroom's jeers, thug and guilty, clung to Ethan like a second skin, their venom amplified by the news vans parked outside, their cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions about the college kid turned criminal. Ethan's lean frame moved with purpose, his dark eyes sharp despite the exhaustion pulling at him, and his mind replaying the moment he'd stood at the defendant's table, his voice a blade cutting through the lies, declaring the prosecution's evidence, a tampered video, a perjured witness, planted fingerprints, a conspiracy to frame him. He'd rattled Whitaker, shaken Hayes, even cracked Klein's arrogance. But the battle was far from won, the theft charge still hanging over him like a noose, tightened by a city quick to judge a black 18-year-old. Back at Northwestern University, the campus was no refuge. Classmates whispered in lecture halls, their eyes darting away when Ethan passed. Professors offering stiff nods but no support, the weight of the accusation turning friends into strangers. His dorm room, once a haven of textbooks and dreams, felt like a cell, its walls closing in as he scrolled through social media, where posts called him a thief and worse, racial slurs peppering the comments, a digital echo of the courtroom's hate. Ethan's scholarship, his ticket out of the South Side, was at risk. The dean's office sending vague emails about conduct reviews, and the student newspaper ran a headline, "Freshman Faces Felony," that twisted the knife. But Ethan wasn't broken. He was Ethan Brooks, son of Malcolm Brooks, a civil rights lawyer whose name commanded respect in Chicago's legal circles, a man who'd raised him on case law and courage, teaching him to fight with wit, not fists. He kept his father's identity secret, a strategic choice to avoid claims of privilege, knowing the court would dismiss him as a rich kid dodging justice. At night, in the dim glow of his laptop, Ethan worked, his fingers flying over keys as he analyzed the gas station camera footage he'd secured, its timestamp proving he was miles from Whitaker's car, and a GPS log from his phone confirming his alibi. Evidence he'd held back in court, waiting for the perfect moment. He cross-referenced Whitaker's stop reports, finding inconsistencies, a pattern of targeting black teens, a trail of complaints buried by the precinct. The setup wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Whitaker's revenge for Ethan's defiance during a traffic stop months ago, a moment when he'd quoted Fourth Amendment rights, leaving the cop humiliated. The community's judgment was relentless. Neighbors who'd once cheered his scholarship now avoided his mother's grocery store, their whispers blaming Ethan for bringing trouble. His mother, a nurse with a quiet strength, hugged him tightly, her voice firm. "You're your father's son, Ethan. Keep fighting." Her words were a lifeline, but the pressure was crushing. Each day a test of his resolve. At school, a classmate, Jamal, a black sophomore who'd faced Whitaker's harassment, slipped Ethan a note during a lecture, his voice low. "I know you didn't do it. Man, Whitaker's dirty. I saw him messing with evidence once. Be careful." The warning sent a chill down Ethan's spine, confirming his suspicions. Whitaker wasn't acting alone, and the precinct was protecting him. Ethan tucked the note away, his mind racing, knowing he needed more, a witness, a document, something to tie Whitaker to the frame job. That afternoon, as he studied in the library, a group of frat boys cornered him, their voices loud with mockery. "Heard you're a carjacker now. Brooks, should have stayed on the south side." Ethan's fists clenched, but he kept his cool, his voice low. "Keep talking, it's all you're good for." Hector, the leader, smirked, shoving a book off Ethan's table. But a librarian's glare scattered them, leaving Ethan to gather his notes, his heart pounding with the fire of a truth he couldn't yet reveal. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Jamal, for every kid targeted by a system that saw their skin as a sentence. That evening, Ethan met his father in secret at a diner, Malcolm's graying temples and steady gaze a mirror of his own resolve. "You're playing a dangerous game, son," Malcolm said, sliding a file across the table. Whitaker's disciplinary record, sealed but accessed through a contact. "They'll come for you harder if you push." Ethan nodded, his voice firm. "They already have. Dad, I'm not stopping." The file was a goldmine. Complaints of evidence tampering, excessive force, all dismissed. And Ethan knew it was the key to unraveling Whitaker's lies. As he left the diner, a black SUV idled across the street, its driver obscured, a silent threat that quickened Ethan's pulse. The community's scorn, the school's rejection, the precinct's shadow, they were closing in. But Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a warrior. And with his evidence growing, he was ready to turn their battlefield into his victory, one truth at a time. The Cook County Circuit Court was a furnace of tension, its oak-paneled threshold closing in as Ethan Brooks stood at the defendant's table, his lean 18-year-old frame taut under a borrowed suit, his dark eyes blazing with a defiance that defied the suffocating weight of the gallery's jeers. Their whispers, "Thief," and "Lock him up," a relentless tide of prejudice that had swelled since his last appearance. The air crackled with anticipation, the packed benches buzzing as Martin Hayes, the prosecutor representing Officer James Whitaker, strode before Judge Richard Klein, his tailored suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his voice a venomous blend of confidence and contempt as he unveiled what he called irrefutable evidence to bury Ethan for the alleged theft of Whitaker's car. Ethan's heart pounded, not from fear but from the fire of a truth he held in reserve, his mind a steel trap honed by years of legal training from his father, Malcolm Brooks, a civil rights lawyer whose name he kept secret to avoid accusations of privilege. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Ethan, a black freshman at Northwestern University, was fighting not just for his freedom, but for every kid targeted by a system that saw their skin as a verdict. Klein, his gray hair a crown of authority, leaned forward, his sneer sharper than ever, his gavel a silent threat as Hayes began, his words a calculated assault. "Your Honor, the state presents Exhibit A, a security video clearly showing Ethan Brooks behind the wheel of Officer Whitaker's vehicle on the night of the theft." On the screen flickered, a grainy clip playing, a figure vaguely resembling Ethan in the driver's seat, the timestamp conveniently blurred, the image distorted just enough to obscure doubt. The gallery gasped, their murmurs swelling, and Hayes pressed on, his smirk widening. "Exhibit B, a sworn statement from Mr. Daniel Carter, a gas station clerk who saw the defendant fleeing the scene." Carter, a wiry man with shifty eyes, took the stand, his voice rehearsed as he claimed, "I saw Brooks, clear as day, speeding off in the cop's car." Ethan's jaw tightened, his hand steady despite the lie, recognizing Carter from a rap sheet he'd uncovered, a career liar with a history of perjury, paid to point the finger. Hayes's final blow was a forensic report, waved triumphantly, alleging Ethan's fingerprints on the steering wheel, a claim that twisted the truth of a routine stop Whitaker had conducted months ago. The gallery roared, their prejudice a palpable force, and Klein banged his gavel, his voice dripping with bias. "This is damning. Brooks, Your little performance last week won't save you now. Anything to say before we move to sentencing? The word sentencing was a guillotine, the courtroom's air growing heavier, but Ethan stood taller, his gaze locking onto Klein's, then Hayes's, finally Whitaker's, whose smug grin faltered under the weight of Ethan's silence. He wasn't just a defendant, he was a prodigy, raised on law by a father who'd toppled giants, and he'd spent days since his arrest gathering a counterattack, a gas station camera showing him elsewhere, a GPS log confirming his alibi, Whitaker's disciplinary record hinting at evidence tampering, but he held back, his strategy deliberate, knowing the moment wasn't yet right. "I have plenty to say, Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice clear, cutting through the gallery's jeers like a blade, drawing gasps from spectators and a scowl from Klein, who leaned back, his skepticism a wall. "The video is manipulated. Check the metadata. It's missing frames. Carter's a known perjurer, convicted twice for lying under oath. And the fingerprints? Whitaker had me touch his car during a stop. He initiated. This isn't evidence, it's a setup, and I'll prove it." In the courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling, a black woman in the back shouting, "Tell him, kid!" while Hayes leaped to his feet, his voice shrill. "Objection! This is outrageous! The defendant's grasping at straws!" But Klein's gavel paused, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of doubt crossing his face as Ethan's command of the room grew undeniable. Whitaker's hands clenched, his sweat visible, and Ethan saw the crack in their armor, a sign his words had struck deep. "You're treading dangerous ground. Brooks," Klein warned, his voice a low growl, but Ethan's smile was cold, his mind racing. He had the footage, the logs, the records, but revealing them now risked tipping his hand too soon. Hayes, recovering, smirked, his voice oily. "Your Honor, this is a desperate act from a guilty boy. Let's end this farce." The gallery cheered, their hate a tidal wave. But Ethan's gaze never wavered, his heart a furnace of resolve. He wasn't just fighting Whitaker's lies. He was fighting a system that had framed him, a precinct that protected its own, a judge who saw his skin before his truth. A lone supporter, Jamal, the classmate who'd warned him about Whitaker, slipped him a nod from the gallery, a reminder of the stakes. Ethan's evidence was a ticking bomb, but the courtroom was a trap. Klein's bias a wall, Hayes's lies a net, and Whitaker's glare a warning. "I'm not done, Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice a low vow, his eyes piercing Whitaker's, whose unease grew palpable. "You'll see the truth, and it'll burn." The courtroom stilled, the weight of his promise hanging heavy, and Ethan Brooks, no thief but a warrior, stood ready to turn their lies into ashes, his father's lessons a shield as he braced for the fight that would define his future. One day, the Cook County Circuit Court was a powder keg, its oak-paneled walls vibrating with the restless energy of a packed gallery. Their whispers a venomous hum as Ethan Brooks stood at the defendant's table, his lean 18-year-old frame unyielding in a borrowed suit, his dark eyes blazing with a fire that turned the courtroom's suffocating air into a battlefield. The weight of the theft charge, grand theft auto, pinned on him by Officer James Whitaker, pressed harder than ever, amplified by the prosecution's barrage of fabricated evidence, a tampered video, a perjured witness, a forensic report twisted to paint Ethan as a criminal. Judge Richard Klein leaned forward, his gray hair a crown of bias, his sneer sharper as he glared at Ethan, his gavel poised like a guillotine, while Martin Hayes, the prosecutor, paced with a predatory smirk, his tailored suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his voice dripping with triumph as he concluded his case. "Your Honor, the state has proven Ethan Brooks's guilt beyond doubt. Fingerprints, video, a witness's testimony. It's time to end this charade and deliver justice." The gallery erupted, their cheers, "Lock him up," and "Thief," a tidal wave of prejudice. But Ethan stood taller, his hands steady, his heart pounding with the resolve of a warrior trained by his father. Malcolm Brooks, a civil rights lawyer whose lessons had forged him into a legal prodigy. He'd held back his evidence, a gas station camera, a GPS log, Whitaker's disciplinary record, waiting for this moment, when the courtroom's arrogance would be its undoing. Klein banged his gavel, his voice a low growl. "Brooks, your last chance to speak before I rule. Make it quick." The gallery leaned in, their jeers softening to murmurs, sensing a shift, and Ethan stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice clear and unyielding, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Your Honor, the state's case isn't just flawed, it's a fabrication, a lie built to frame me, and I'll prove it." Gasps rippled through the room, Hayes' smirk faltering, Whitaker's hands clenching on the witness stand, and Klein's brow furrowed, his skepticism wavering under Ethan's poise. "Permission to present my evidence," Ethan said, his tone sharp, and Klein, caught off guard, nodded, his gavel still. Ethan produced a USB drive, its black casing glinting as he handed it to the bailiff, who plugged it into the courtroom system. The screen flared, a crystal-clear video from a gas station camera playing, showing Ethan at a coffee shop miles from Whitaker's car on the night of the theft. The timestamp unedited, the metadata intact. "This proves I wasn't there," Ethan said, his voice rising, each word a hammer. "The prosecution's video, manipulated. I've got a forensic analysis to confirm it." The gallery gasped, reporters scribbling, and Hayes leaped to his feet, his voice shrill. "Objection! This is inadmissible!" Where did he even get this? But Ethan pressed on, his gaze locking onto Whitaker's, whose sweat was now visible, his grin gone. "Exhibit 2, a GPS log from my phone, placing me at the coffee shop, corroborated by receipts and witnesses. Exhibit 3, Officer Whitaker's disciplinary record, showing a history of evidence tampering and complaints against black teens, buried by the precinct." The courtroom roared, Klein banging his gavel, but Ethan's voice cut through, a thunderclap. "And one more thing, Your Honor, I'm not just a student. I'm Ethan Brooks, son of Malcolm Brooks, trained in law since I could read. You thought you could bury me because of my skin, but you picked the wrong fight." The room fell deathly silent, jaws dropping, cameras flashing, Klein's face paling as he realized the boy he'd called boy was a prodigy. Hayes' hands trembling as he fumbled his notes, Whitaker slumping in his seat, his eyes darting to the exit. The black woman in the gallery, the activist, stood, her fist raised, shouting, "That's right!" And others joined, their applause a wave that shook the room. Ethan's evidence was a bombshell, dismantling the prosecution's case, but he wasn't done. His voice a low growl. "This isn't just about me. It's about a system that lets cops like Whitaker frame kids like me. Lawyers like Hayes twist the truth, and judges like you look the other way." Klein's face reddened, his voice hoarse. "You're out of line, Brooks!" But the gallery's cheers drowned him out, reporters surging forward, and Hayes, desperate, stammered, "This is a stunt. The evidence is unverified." But the bailiff confirmed the file's authenticity, and Klein's gavel fell silent, his authority crumbling under Ethan's command. Brooks stepped back, his heart racing, the weight of his father's legacy anchoring him, knowing he'd turned the tables but not the war. Whitaker's glare was a warning, Hayes' panic a signal, and Klein's hesitation a crack in the system's armor. The courtroom was a crucible, the gallery divided, and Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a warrior, his evidence a sword that had struck deep, ready to cut through the lies until justice burned bright. The Chicago dusk painted the skyline in hues of amber and steel, but for Ethan Brooks, the glow of streetlights outside the Cook County Circuit Court felt like a spotlight on a battlefield, illuminating the weight of a victory that was both electrifying and precarious after his explosive courtroom showdown. His lean 18-year-old frame moved swiftly through the throng of reporters, their cameras flashing and questions shouted, "Ethan, how'd you get that evidence? And are you really Malcolm Brooks' son?" As he slipped into a waiting car, his dark eyes sharp with the resolve that had turned the tables on Officer James Whitaker, Prosecutor Martin Hayes, and Judge Richard Klein. The revelation of his identity as the son of a renowned civil rights lawyer, coupled with irrefutable evidence, a gas station video, a GPS log, Whitaker's disciplinary record, had dismantled the prosecution's fabricated theft charge, leaving the courtroom reeling and the gallery divided, some cheering his triumph, others clinging to their prejudice. But Ethan knew this was no final win. It was a spark in a powder keg, and the real fight was just beginning. Inside the car, Malcolm Brooks, his father, sat with a steady gaze that mirrored Ethan's own, his graying temples a testament to decades of battling injustice. His voice low but firm as he handed Ethan a new file. "You've rattled them, son. But Whitaker's not acting alone. This goes deeper. Precinct corruption, maybe higher. We need to move fast." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding with the weight of his father's trust, his mind already dissecting the file, internal memos, whistleblower tips, a pattern of evidence tampering linked to Whitaker's unit, buried by a precinct desperate to protect its own. The courtroom had been a stage, but the investigation was a war. And Ethan, a freshman at Northwestern University with a legal mind honed by years at his father's side, was ready to fight. Back on campus, the air was thick with tension. Classmates who'd once shunned him now offered cautious nods, their whispers shifting from thief to hero. But others, fueled by online hate and campus gossip, doubled down, scrawling slurs on his dorm door, their prejudice a constant reminder of the stakes. The student newspaper ran a front-page story. Brooks clears name, exposes cop. But the dean's office, under pressure from donors tied to the police union, sent Ethan a warning about disruptive behavior, a veiled threat to his scholarship. His mother, a nurse whose quiet strength anchored him, called daily, her voice a lifeline. "You're making waves, Ethan. Be careful, they don't like losing." Her words echoed as Ethan met Malcolm at their law firm's office, a sleek space lined with case files and awards, where they pored over evidence late into the night, cross-referencing Whitaker's stops with precinct logs, uncovering a network of officers who'd framed black teens to boost arrest quotas. A key find, a suppressed dash cam video from Whitaker's car, obtained through a hacker contact, showed him planting evidence in another case, a bombshell that could topple the unit. But the deeper they dug, the greater the danger. Ethan's phone buzzed with anonymous texts. "Back off, kid, or you're done." On campus, Jamal, the classmate who'd tipped him about Whitaker's corruption, pulled him aside in the library, his voice low. "They're watching you, man. I saw Whitaker's partner near the quad last night. They know you're not stopping." Ethan's pulse quickened, the black SUV from the diner flashing in his mind, but he nodded, his voice firm. "Let him watch. I've got more to show." The community was a crucible. Southside activists rallied at City Hall, their signs reading "Justice for Ethan," while police unions pushed back, flooding local news with claims that Ethan's evidence was fake and his father's influence a conflict of interest. A protest outside the precinct turned heated, batons clashing with placards, and Ethan's name became a lightning rod, splitting Chicago between those who saw him as a victim and those who called him a troublemaker. The pressure was relentless, but Ethan's resolve was iron. His father's lessons a shield: never back down, always strike with truth. At a strategy meeting, Malcolm laid out the next move, a motion to dismiss the case, backed by their evidence, and a countersuit against Whitaker for false arrest, with Hayes and Klein as potential co-conspirators. "We're not just clearing your name," Malcolm said, his eyes fierce. "We're exposing a system that's been framing kids for years." Ethan agreed, but a new threat emerged, a leaked email, traced to Hayes' office, suggesting a deal to bury the case if Ethan dropped his countersuit, a bribe disguised as mercy. Ethan's blood boiled, his voice a low growl. "They think they can buy me? Let's hit harder." That night, as he left the law firm, a figure stepped from the shadows, a man in a hoodie, his face obscured, his voice a hiss. "You're digging your grave, Brooks." Ethan froze, his fists clenched, but the man vanished into the dark, leaving a note. Quit, or your family pays. The precinct's reach was long, the community's faith fragile, and Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a warrior. His evidence a sword ready to cut deeper. His father by his side as they braced for a fight that would shake Chicago to its core. The Chicago night was a canvas of flickering streetlights and restless shadows. But for Ethan Brooks, the dim glow of his laptop in his northwestern dorm room was a beacon in a war that had consumed his life since his arrest for a theft he didn't commit. A lie spun by Officer James Whitaker to silence a black 18-year-old who dared challenge his authority. His lean frame hunched over the screen, his dark eyes sharp with focus. Ethan sifted through a digital trove of evidence, gas station footage, GPS logs, Whitaker's disciplinary record that had rocked the Cook County Circuit Court, exposing the precinct's corruption and earning him a reprieve, but not a victory. The theft charge still loomed, a noose tightened by prosecutor Martin Hayes' manipulations and Judge Richard Klein's bias. And Ethan, the son of civil rights lawyer Malcolm Brooks, knew the real fight was just beginning. His father's office, the fortress of case files and justice, was their war room, where Malcolm, his graying temples, a badge of battles won, handed Ethan a new lead, a leaked precinct memo, obtained through a whistleblower, hinting at a broader conspiracy, a network of officers and officials shielding Whitaker's frame jobs, led by a shadowy figure high in the city's power structure. "This isn't just about you, Ethan," Malcolm said, his voice a low growl, his eyes fierce. "They're protecting someone big, and we need to find out who." Ethan's pulse quickened, his mind racing as he cross-referenced the memo with Whitaker's stop reports, uncovering a name, Deputy Commissioner Robert Langley, a precinct overseer with a clean, public face but a trail of dismissed complaints mirroring Whitaker's. The discovery was a bombshell, but dangerous. Langley's influence reached the mayor's office, and exposing him risked everything. Ethan and Malcolm dug deeper, hacking into encrypted emails through a contact, finding a thread between Langley and Hayes' law firm, payments disguised as consulting fees timed with Ethan's arrest. The pieces clicked. Whitaker's frame job wasn't personal, it was ordered, a test to silence a kid who'd gotten too close. The South Side community was a crucible. Activists rallied at churches, their signs reading "Free Ethan," while police unions smeared him on talk radio, calling his evidence fake and Malcolm's involvement biased. Ethan's dorm was a target, slurs scrawled on his door, his laptop hacked, a warning to back off, but his mother's voice, steady over the phone, kept him grounded. "You're stronger than their hate. Ethan, keep going, keep." Her words fueled him, but the danger escalated that night as Ethan left Malcolm's firm. A black SUV screeching to a halt, two masked men lunging at him, their fists swinging. Ethan dodged, his heart pounding, but a punch grazed his jaw before Jamal, his classmate, appeared, shouting, "Get off him!" The attackers fled, leaving Ethan bruised but unbroken, Jamal's eyes wide with fear. "They're coming for you, man. Whitaker's crew. They know you're onto something." Ethan nodded, his voice firm. Then we hit harder. The community's support surged. Jamal organized a campus vigil, hundreds of students chanting Ethan's name, their candles a shield against the darkness. Malcolm secured a meeting with a sympathetic DA, presenting their findings. But the DA warned, "Langley's untouchable unless you've got ironclad proof. Get it, and we'll back you." Ethan's evidence was a ticking bomb. Langley's emails, Whitaker's dash cam, a whistleblower's affidavit. But the precinct's reach was long. The SUV's attack, a warning of what was at stake. On campus, a professor, moved by Ethan's fight, slipped him a tip. A retired cop willing to testify about Langley's cover-ups. A final piece to break the conspiracy. Ethan's heart raced. His father's lessons a mantra. Truth is your weapon, timing is your shield. The city was a chessboard, the courtroom looming. And Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a warrior. His evidence a flame ready to burn through the corruption, his community's faith the armor as he braced for the final stand. The Cook County Circuit Court was a coliseum of clashing wills, its oak-paneled walls echoing with the roar of a gallery split between hope and hatred. Their voices a tempest as Ethan Brooks stood at the defendant's table. His lean 18-year-old frame a pillar of defiance in a tailored suit, his dark eyes blazing with a fire that had already cracked the armor of Officer James Whitaker, Prosecutor Martin Hayes, and Judge Richard Klein. The air was thick with the weight of a theft charge that had been exposed as a lie, a frame job to silence a black Northwestern freshman who dared defy a corrupt precinct. But today's hearing, a final ruling on Ethan's motion to dismiss and his countersuit for false arrest, was the crucible where justice would either triumph or crumble. Klein, his bias shaken by Ethan's relentless evidence, gripped his gavel, his face a mask of reluctant respect. But before he could speak, Hayes rose, his tailored suit a veneer over desperation, his voice a frantic plea. "Your Honor, the defense's claims are a distraction. We have a new witness, a precinct analyst who will confirm the integrity of our evidence." The gallery buzzed, and Hayes called a woman to the stand, Lisa Monroe, who claimed, "Our video analysis shows no tampering. Brooks's footage is the fake." Ethan's heart pounded, recognizing Monroe as a precinct loyalist, her testimony a desperate ploy to salvage the case. The gallery's jeers, "He's done," swelled, but Ethan stood calm, his mind a steel trap. His father, Malcolm Brooks, nodding from the front row, his graying temples a badge of battles fought, his presence a shield. "Permission to cross-examine," Ethan said, his voice clear, slicing through the chaos. And Klein, his skepticism wavering, nodded, his gavel still. Ethan approached Monroe, his questions a scalpel. "Miss Monroe, your firm's funded by police grants, correct? And you omitted the metadata audit I submitted, proving your video was edited, didn't you?" Monroe faltered, her eyes darting to Hayes, and Ethan produced a new bombshell, a sworn affidavit from a retired cop, obtained through a professor's tip, detailing Deputy Commissioner Robert Langley's orders to frame Ethan, linking him to Whitaker and Hayes. "This is the truth," Ethan said, his voice a thunderclap, projecting the affidavit on the screen, Langley's signature glaring. "They didn't just target me, they've been rigging cases for years. And Langley's at the top." The courtroom exploded, activists chanting "justice," while police supporters shouted, "Lies." Hayes' face drained of color, his objection, "This is inadmissible," drowned by Klein's gavel, his voice hoarse. "Overruled. I want to see everything." Ethan played a final piece, intercepted emails between Langley and Hayes, recovered by a hacker, ordering neutralization of Ethan, proof of a conspiracy reaching the precinct's core. Whitaker slumped, his hands shaking, while Hayes stammered, his career unraveling. The gallery's cheers grew, led by Jamal, Ethan's classmate, whose rally had galvanized the South Side, their signs now lining the courthouse steps. But the precinct fought dirty hours before the hearing. A key witness, the whistleblower rookie, was threatened, his car torched, a message to silence Ethan. Malcolm countered, securing the rookie's testimony via video, a move that stunned Hayes, who tried one last trick, a forged document claiming Ethan's evidence was stolen. But Ethan dismantled it with a server log, proving its origin in Hayes' firm. Klein's face hardened, his voice low. "This court will not be manipulated. Brooks, you've made your case." The ruling was deferred, but the tide had turned, the gallery's applause a wave. Activists embracing Ethan, Aisha, the community leader, shouting, "You're our voice!" Outside, Chicago was a firestorm. Rallies swelled, students marched, but the precinct's retaliation hit hard. Ethan's mother received a death threat. A note slipped under her door. "Your son's done." The city was a crucible, the courtroom a chessboard, and Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a warrior. His evidence a sword that had struck deep, his family's courage the shield as he braced for a victory that would rewrite justice. The Chicago sunrise bathed the Cook County Circuit Court in a golden glow, its towering columns a silent witness to the storm that had raged within. But inside, the oak-paneled courtroom was a crucible of final reckoning, its packed gallery a sea of faces, activists, students, reporters, and skeptics, whose murmurs stilled as Ethan Brooks stood at the defendant's table, his lean, 18-year-old frame clad in a tailored suit, a gift from his father, Malcolm Brooks, whose steady presence in the front row was a fortress of pride, his graying temples and fierce gaze a testament to the legacy that had forged his son into a legal prodigy. The air was electric, charged with the weight of a theft charge that had nearly destroyed Ethan, a black Northwestern freshman, framed by Officer James Whitaker's lies, Prosecutor Martin Hayes' manipulations, and Judge Richard Klein's bias, only to be dismantled by Ethan's relentless counterattack. Gas station footage, GPS logs, a damning dash cam video, and a whistleblower's testimony exposing a precinct's corruption. Today's hearing, the ruling on Ethan's motion to dismiss in his countersuit for false arrest, was the culmination of a war that had shaken Chicago, and Ethan, his dark eyes blazing, was ready to deliver the final blow. Klein's form, his authority battered by Ethan's evidence, sat rigid, his gavel a relic of a system under siege. As Ethan stepped forward, his voice a thunderclap that silenced the room. Your Honor, this case was never about a stolen car. It was about a precinct that targets black kids, a lawyer who sells justice, and a court that looks away. I've proven my innocence, exposed their lies, and now I demand justice, not just for me, but for every kid they've framed. The gallery erupted, Southside activists chanting Brooks, while police union supporters hissed, their divide a mirror of a city at a crossroads. Klein raised his hand, his voice strained but conceding. The court has reviewed the defendant's evidence. The motion to dismiss is granted. A roar swept the room, cameras flashing, but Ethan pressed on, his gaze piercing Whitaker, slumped in the witness stand, and Hayes, whose tailored suit couldn't hide his trembling hands. And the countersuit, Ethan said, his words a blade. Charges Officer Whitaker, Martin Hayes, and Your Honor with conspiracy to obstruct justice, false arrest, and abuse of power. The courtroom gasped, Klein's face paling, Hayes leaping to his feet, his voice shrill. This is outrageous. You can't sue a judge. But Malcolm rose, his presence commanding, his voice a low growl. You can when he's complicit. We have evidence. Your emails, Whitaker's orders, Klein's rulings ignoring precedent. Step down or face the consequences. The gallery roared, reporters surging, and Klein's gavel fell silent, his career crumbling under the weight of truth. The ruling was swift. The countersuit was approved, triggering an investigation by the Illinois Judicial Inquiry Board, which uncovered Klein's ties to police unions, leading to his suspension. Whitaker, exposed by the dashcam and whistleblower, faced criminal charges for evidence tampering, his badge stripped, his unit dismantled. Hayes, caught in a web of payments to false witnesses, was disbarred, his firm collapsing under lawsuits from other frame victims. Ethan's victory was a seismic shift, the courtroom emptying in a frenzy of cheers and protests, activists embracing him, Jamal, his classmate, grinning. You did it, man. Outside, Chicago was alive. Southside churches held victory rallies. Northwestern students marched, their signs reading Ethan Brooks, our voice, while the precinct reeled, its corruption laid bare. Ethan's scholarship was reinstated, the dean issuing a public apology, and his story, a black teen who had outsmarted a corrupt system, spread nationwide, inspiring op-eds, podcasts, and a scholarship fund in his name for minority law students. At a community center, Ethan spoke to a crowd, Aisha, the activist from the gallery, by his side, his voice resonant. This wasn't just my fight, It's ours. They tried to silence us, but we're louder, stronger, and we won't stop until justice is for everyone. The crowd cheered, their applause a wave that carried into the night, and Ethan's mother, her eyes shining, hugged him, whispering, "Your father's proud, and so am I." Malcolm Tom, recovering from the gunshot graze, clapped his shoulder, his voice soft. "You're the future, son." The threats, the brick, the SUV, the gunfire faded. The precinct's power broken, but Ethan knew the fight against prejudice was eternal. He returned to Northwestern, his dorm now a hub for activism, his classmates inspired, Jamal leading a legal aid group in his honor. Ethan Brooks was no thief. He was a lawyer's son, a prodigy, a beacon. His legacy a call to rise, to fight, to build a world where truth outshines lies, where justice is not a dream, but a reality for all. From a shamed teen to a legal prodigy, Ethan Brooks exposed corruption and won justice. Thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell for more epic stories. Don't miss our next video.